and welcome everyone. And as usual, I feel we've got an outstanding program for you today. We've been focusing for the last few months on the water supply situation. Start with that. So before we start, do our normal flag salute, and I will lead us. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Taking our program out of order, our Linda Ackerman and WB report.
Thank you for allowing me to go early. I have another meeting in Riverside. Keep this kind of fast and as short as possible. The drought, of course, at Metropolitan is front and center. It's one of our main concerns. The Met Board adopted a resolution at its last meeting supporting the governor's call for the 25% reduction in consumer water use. And the board declared a water supply allocation plan set at a regional shortage level 3, which is about a 15% cut of deliveries. This will become effective July 1 through June 30th of 2016. The board also voted to revisit the supply conditions and make any further changes if warranted in December. We're going to revisit that in December. The governor, as you know, has now demanded, I shouldn't say demanded, is promising fines of up to $10,000 per offense for people who are not adjusting to this 25% cutback. Details on how they're going to implement this are still a little bit sketchy. I don't think I have to tell you that water supply is not improved. The December storm, and even the most recent storm, provided runoff of the reservoirs. However, the snowpack remains the lowest ever recorded in the Sierras. Had we had the tunnels installed that we would like to have, we could have captured almost 200,000 acre-feet more than was provided during those storms. The news is slightly better on the Colorado, but you have to keep in mind that it is still in a very long drought. The runoff forecast for April on the Colorado is down to 52% of average, which is pretty bad, making 2015 one of the drier years on record for the river. I did hear recently on the news that El Nino is once again supposed to show up. Supposedly there's a 60% chance this time. He did not show up last year as predicted, so we'll see what happens there. The 17-member Integrated Resource and Planning Committee met, and they are tasked with the IRP update. They laid out their plan, which included targets, member agency technical processes, the public outreach process, and the timeline. We will report on this periodically as the plan and its components begin to develop. And if you have any questions about the IRP, don't come to me, go to Director Larry McKinney. Now, just a little bit of an update on the Bay Delta. Salinity of bromide levels are higher, as you might expect, with less water that we need to mix so that we have a nice quality of water. But it is still within regulation requirements. Just to show you a comparison, in 1977, during the last big drought, salinity levels at the intake pumps were 730 milligrams per liter. The salinity levels today at intake is 459 per liter. So it's still well within the requirements, and we have a ways to go before it becomes a real issue. There are some proposed gates to be put up within the delta along some of the rivers to help control salinity intrusion. A gate at Falls River, which is closest to Suisun Bay, will be one of the first to be installed. As most of you have heard, California is studying another alternative within the BDCP. And this actually centers on, the changes are centered around the permitting process. The federal government just can't seem to get its arms around a 50-year agreement, which is what we would like to have. So they would like to handle this under a different section of the ESA, which will allow them to permit for shorter lengths of time. This is not Well, there are pluses and minuses to both of these. One is Section 10 and one is Section 7 of the ESA. The federal government uses Section 10 mostly with projects that have biological opinion considerations within them, which of course ours does. Metropolitan feels this is a step back from the co-equal goals versus the governor, who has incorporated the co-equal goals into his most recent California Water Plan. Met will have to look at this and assess the business case for continued investment in the project, make sure it's consistent with board policy goals, along with other regulatory issues. I would have recommended to you in the past, and I would still advise it, if you pull up some of these meetings, and this was the Bay Delta, no, actually this wasn't, now I can't tell you which meeting it was, but it was this month's meetings. If you pull up the archive presentations, they're really good, and this one really calls out exactly the differences between this Section 7 and 710. So if you want more information, I suggest you do that. Now, just as I finished putting this report together, I received an email later yesterday talking about the new alternative plan, which is now called by the governor, the California Eco Restore and California Water Fix. There is a website, it's pretty fancy, so they've been thinking about this for a while. The website is www.californiawaterfix.com. It is really worth a look. I thought I'd give you just a brief update on the progress. You may remember when Metropolitan put forth and the board voted for a plan to fund foundational action programs within the Met Area Agency. Different agencies applied with their projects and were granted funds. So I just thought I'd update you in Orange County. We had one in the San Juan Basin Groundwater. Well, it's called the San Juan Basin Groundwater and Desalination Optimization Program. This project was awarded $200,000 to analyze options for sustainable long-term use of an impaired watershed, in this case a small groundwater basin. This project has experienced delays due to the additional review required for the adoption of the San Juan Basin Groundwater and Facilities Master Plan, which is necessary to proceed with the supplemental analysis. And new information also as a result of the drought has come up. MWD estimates no impact to the overall schedule, and it is on track for completion in the first quarter of 2016. The other project that was funded is the Dana Point Test Slant Well. This project will further the understanding and the utilization of slant well intakes for development of an ocean desal plant. It is focused on overcoming barriers to the use of the wells in the San Juan Basin. The project was awarded $200,000, and they have a remaining balance of $83,465. The project is on track for completion also in the first quarter of 2016, despite initial delays due to participating sub-agency staff changes and new information on the application of slant wells in other locations. So that's kind of it for Met for today. And now comes the water fact. I know you all look forward to that. I thought this was interesting. In May of 2013, a pretty nosy geologist found a 2.6 billion year old pocket of water in a mine 2 miles below the Earth's surface. This was in Ontario, Canada. It is the most ancient pocket of water ever found, older even than the dawn of multicellular life. That's pretty interesting. And that's my report.
Thank you. Introductions. Any new attendees or maybe someone that hasn't been here for a while to introduce themselves? Our legislative representatives. We have Michelle from Assemblymember Allen's office is going to show us.
I am. I love having fans. Thank you. I got one back up here.
While we're working on that, let me give you a little bit of an update on what's going on with your Association of California Water Agencies. Obviously, Aqua, along with everybody else in the state, is totally preoccupied right now with how to address the emergency declaration and that part of the drought response. So that's taking up a lot of time. But there are a few other things that have also been going on, and it's good to keep in mind that there's other work that's happening at the same time.
So just a couple of highlights. One is at its March meeting, WACO adopted a policy paper. It was a product of 4 months of work from a task force that WACO had created to look at groundwater policies. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the thing that's down here. Storage policies, and obviously intending to try to influence how the Prop 1, $2.7 billion could be invested, but they're really looking at what's the best bang for the buck for increasing storage in the state. So that report was adopted on the 27th of March. WACO is continuing to do its other work, including work on legislation. WACO sponsored 2 bills this year that are proceeding through the process, one on CEQA, helping to streamline CEQA filing requirements, and one on Chromium-6 compliance, which is actually a really big deal from a dollar perspective if you look into that. And then the big news, the announcement obviously is kind of late now, but if you would like to learn more about all these topics, the big spring conference is next week up in Sacramento. It'll be all week long. You can bet that there's going to be a lot of discussion about all these hot topics of interest. I highly encourage all of you to go, and if you haven't registered now, it's too late to register online, but they'll be happy to take your money at the door. Within our own region, Region 10, which just to remind everybody, WACO Region 10 is Orange County and San Diego County. We have a Region 10 board. We currently have a vacancy on that board. We are going to appoint, the Region 10 board will appoint someone to fill that vacancy. The application period for that ends at 5 o'clock today. We have a resolution of your board. We have started already, probably not there. But we do have a couple of really good applicants, and we're going to be making that decision on that appointment on Monday before the conference starts. And then shortly after that, just to confuse you, you'll also see a call for candidates for the regular election, because we run on 2-year terms. The terms run through the end of this year. We'll be starting the election process for the term to start in January. And when we do that, there will be, in addition to the seats that we have on the WACO Region 10 board now, which there are 3 in Orange County, there will be 4 seats next year. So we'll be adding a person from Orange County. So if you're interested in that, look into it or talk to me and find out how to put your name in there. And hopefully do really good things with the WACO Region 10 to help our members respond to drought. So that's the outward report.
How many applicants do you have so far?
3 that I know of. All highly qualified people. Good to have a hard decision.
Thank you, Larry. Michelle Schutz will introduce herself. It sounds like everyone already know you here, so.
Well, just a few troublemakers in the back. For those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Michelle Schutz, and I'm here representing Assemblyman Travis Allen of the 72nd Assembly District. I was told some people don't know that I'm usually here on Fridays, and again, it's because I sit next to John Collins, and so I apologize, but Mayor Pro Tem Schill Brothers was nice enough to put a buffer between us this morning, so now everyone knows I'm here. Questions at the
I just
end?
want to say the picture of the fellow up there is listening to you, and that's what we all feel like. So. I am treating him better.
So unfortunately, I am not the great orator that Assemblyman Allen is, and he, as you can see, is on Fox News, which I'm very proud of.
I had the honor to meet today the speaker. She has a very extensive background, but he asked me not to read it because it's too long. But I will point out a couple of important things. Ms. Kate Williams is a program manager for the California Water Foundation. She implements strategies and projects for the California Water Foundation. She worked for Assemblymen Laird and Huffman, and 4 years as Assistant Director of Policy and Finance for the California Bay Delta Authority. Overall, she has about 35 years of experience, and she's going to speak on how the groundwater basins in California are going to be helped with this legislation. So please help me welcome Ms. Kate Williams.
Thank you.
So I'm humbled to come talk about groundwater to the Orange County Water District in Waco. It's kind of like, don't ask me too many hard questions. I'm not a hydrogeologist. So I'm gonna, like I said, talk about groundwater, which is a strange thing to do down here because you guys are more than ahead of the game. And the legislation wasn't targeted at Orange County Water District, although I have to say, it was very helpful to work with Orange County and folks in this region. They were helped me think through the legislation, help the group that was drafting understand the problem. So I'm honored to be here. Thanks for letting me join you, and I'll see what I can do to explain what's going on in Sacramento with the implementation of the legislation and the rest of the state, as well as how it might affect you. And I know Adam Hutchinson is going to go after me and talk more specifically about Orange County. So a little bit about who we are at the California Water Foundation. It's a new program, 3 years in the making, and we're actually a program within an organization called Resources Legacy Fund that has been around for over 10 years. So what the program does, what the organization does, is bring in philanthropic funding to work on natural resources issues. And 3 years ago, they created the water program, named it the Water Foundation. And Lester Snow was hired, I was hired, and we have about 5 or 6 people. So what do we do at the Water Foundation? We're working on how to make a difference with philanthropic funding. So we're not going to run an entire grants program like DWR, but we're looking for how to affect policy, make better policy choices at the state level or regional level, work on the ground with projects that can work with innovation, how to move the game forward with all the challenges we have. And groundwater was a really big part of it. So we spent, from the beginning, we knew we couldn't work on sustainable water management in California for all aspects, city, farm, and environment, without groundwater, improving in sustainable groundwater management. So this is, when they created the program, it was really like, what's going on with water in California, and I think many of these issues are still very relevant. So we have all these factors and challenges that are affecting water in California. So you have population, infrastructure, overdraft, degraded ecosystem, groundwater basins, mostly in the Central Valley and Central Coast. Really made it a real problem for folks that don't really live water like you do day to day. In the context, that also brought the kind of the kumbaya of Prop 1 finally passing, the water bond, after all those years since 2009. With it came the California Governor's Water Action Plan. So that set the stage in January for kind of setting the policy tone of what we're about to face. And I'll go into that a little more detail. I'm sure you've had a presentation on the Water Action Plan, but I'm going to focus on the groundwater part. So there's, just like anything in California, groundwater is just a piece. You can't solve one of the water management challenges without looking at all the bigger picture. So it was when Governor Brown put the Water Action Plan and really at a high policy level at all these state administrations worked to say this is a broad comprehensive package we have to work on. Groundwater is going to be a piece of it. But it was really for the first time that I'd ever seen that they took groundwater and actually said something about it at a state policy level. And up until then, it had always been a regional solution. You've worked on your regional solutions here, but that's how it's been approached. There's not been a state mandate or initiative. So what the Water Action Plan did, and really set the tone for the legislation, was that this is a local initiative. It needs to stay at the local level for implementation to avoid these permanent impacts from groundwater overdraft. But the key point was the third bullet is if local agencies have not made sufficient progress, the state should step in until an adequate local program's in place. So this is really what set the tone to say this, and this was the framework we had been working on with water managers prior to the Water Action Plan to say this is the balance. You have to give the tools and authorities to the locals that say if nothing happens under a reasonable time frame, then the state will step in. And that was really the theme throughout the complex 3-bill process. So I probably could skip over this, but this is the storyline that we were bringing forward for the rest of the state. You are well aware that groundwater is a critical part of integrated water management. You live it, but we were probably trying to convince this to the rest of the state. So much of the state thinks of storage as surface storage, not groundwater storage and the reliance on groundwater. But it's become more and more reliant over the years
during a drought is at least or more 60% of the full supply of the state. And it used to be more 30% on average, and now it's 40% in whatever is an average year in California. So then it was the story of several decades, at least, of increasing reliance on groundwater, and that was what was happening in the rest of the state. Is the reliance on groundwater was causing impacts, and I'm going to go through this as well. So this is from the recent released report from DWR that I think it's a supplement to the California Water Plan, and it really shows, see if I can read it from here, 2005 to 2010 is the overdraft. So basically red's bad and blue's good. So this is showing that red is up to 60 feet of additional decline in the groundwater elevation during that 10-year period. And they're starting to document on a statewide basis some of this information. Each region might have their own data, but to get a bigger picture of how bad it's gotten in the Central Valley, this was some of the new data. And there's gaps, but this is coming from what's called the CASGEM program. More recently, they did a data on, let's see, this is 2013 to 14. This is 1 year. Additional declines of over 10 feet are the red. So problems continuing. Now, I should say that it's supposed to be in integrated water management, groundwater. You're supposed to rely on your groundwater during dry times. So this is not unheard of. This isn't the problem by itself. Is that it wasn't getting replaced during wet years. Didn't come up and fluctuate back when you had water to supplement it. So some of the problems from the overdraft over the last 50 years, and this is on the coast, and you're familiar with this, but historic seawater intrusion is still happening up and down the state. This is near Salinas. The green is 1930. Thanks, you can see it better than I can on the screen. And that's where it was, and now it's like 2010 on the far right, 2011 on the far right is still moving in. And they're working hard in this area, but they haven't put in a lot of seawater barriers or the actions to reduce pumping when you need to. This is the land subsidence photos or diagrams showing where the biggest declines in subsidence, land subsidence in the Central Valley are in recent times. It was well known up until from the 30s to the 70s that there was serious decline, but it has recently moved up to the Chowchilla Los Banos area and down in the Tulare, Kettleman City area, where it's 3 to 4 feet during that 4-year period, 2007 to 11, has been documented. And a lot of this is coming out because you're doing another project in the area and you start to run your elevation lines to build a new aqueduct or conveyance system, or in this case, they were doing some river fish screens and the elevations weren't lining up and they found out that the subsidence was happening. So the picture on the right is basically one of the canals in the El Nido area where they used to inspect the levees and the bridge from a boat. And they can't quite get under the road now. Another impact from the overdraft is the disconnection with surface streams. So in the Sacramento Valley, you still have enough groundwater close enough to the surface to be connected to your streams. In the San Joaquin Valley, in many cases, it's completely disconnected with the drop in the elevation. So this is a part of the legislation to look at trying to alleviate that. And the picture on the right is the Cosumnes River near Sacramento and Elk Grove, where the water is not there during the fall like it used to be, even in regular years. So now I'll focus on the Act. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, pretty comprehensive, but still targeted at just certain areas of the state. Again, the theme is local management with state oversight. Key is to give you the tools and management tied to Bulletin 118 basin boundaries. So this actually affects Orange County in that the Bulletin 118 basin might not line up perfectly with the Orange County Water District service area, but up and down the state, we're saying don't manage part of a basin, manage the entire basin, think of it as a whole. And the last is that we put in the legislation 2 key themes: a new governance structure over the basin to manage it, so think about the full system, as well as plans and some new requirements in the groundwater sustainability plans. So the plans, what's different from these, the rest of the state, most of Central Valley have been working on groundwater management plans for 20 years through previous legislation. What's different about these plans is they require you to achieve sustainability, and they give you a 20-year time frame, and they say set 5-year increments and milestones, but you actually have to have measurable objectives. You have to monitor those objectives and thresholds and change your practices if you exceed those thresholds. They don't specify what the thresholds should be in the Act. That's going to be coming out of regulation early next year from the Department of Water Resources about what specifically needs to be in a GSP. But this is a very different requirement than the current groundwater management plans. A key part of this is you don't have to have one plan or one agency to cover the basin. You can have multiple, which then says, well, if you're going to have multiple plans covering one basin, then you need a coordination agreement. So you're all working off common assumptions and data to meet the sustainable yield and the practices. This is a picture of what areas of the state are affected by the Act. We built off the CASGEM program because a map had just been created in 2014 that said where are the high and medium priority areas and where are the low and very low priority areas. And their criteria in CASGEM was, amount of water use, land use, a population, which then drove the areas in the south, you'll see are high and medium, which include Orange County. It's where I would say Anaheim is, but those are high and medium priority not because of the overdraft problem, but because of the population brought them into it and the heavy reliance on groundwater. So I'll go through, so you can see the entire Central Valley is picked up. So it's the orange and yellow are all subject to the Act, green and light blue are not. You can voluntarily participate in the Act and you can then subject to all the requirements, but you're not mandated. Some of the key dates that are coming up. The first two are DWR dates. These are dates that the next level of detail of you can only put so much in legislation. It's better to go through a regulatory process. First one is if you don't like your basin boundary that you were handed through Bulletin 118 and it doesn't seem to make sense now in terms of a regulatory program and the multiple jurisdictions, do you want to put in a request to modify your basin? We allowed for that, and DWR is going through the regulatory process right now to say what level of change should be allowed, what's reasonable, and so you don't affect the implementation of the Act. The second one is June 2016, DWR has to finish regulations on what goes in a GSP, what goes in a groundwater sustainability plan, what does measurable objectives mean, what does the definition of sustainability mean. So when you're writing your plan and you're implementing it, you actually know you're in compliance or not. It's supposed to be as clear as mud, I guess, let's hope. And then the key thing is there's dates for when the plans have to be done. So the last 3 dates are local deadlines. And the idea is you've hit this deadline, the state will not step in. So June 2017, you have to put a notice in about who's the GSA, who's the agency in your region. And this is where almost all the attention is right now. Such a new change for these regions to think about how a county works with a local agency, works with a water district, works with a city. And I'll go into that in more in terms of what does GSA formation mean for the rest of the state. So the dates are you form your GSA in 2017, so basically two and a half years from the time that legislation passed, and another 3 years to 5 years to write your plan. And the dates are different. So 2020 is a date if you're a critically overdrafted basin, and those are defined by the Department of Water Resources already. Then you have to do it sooner. You have 2 more years if you're not in critical overdraft. Then it's a 20-year, this is a key part of the legislation to say you can't fix something overnight that's been going on for a long time, but you have to show progress in those 5 years, 5-year increments. So definition of sustainability is a broad definition in the Act, and there's actually multiple definitions. There's sustainable groundwater management, there's sustainable yield, but to kind of sum it up, it basically says you need to manage your groundwater basin to prevent these undesirable results, prevent them in terms of significant and unreasonable. So that is what needs to be defined better in the regulations. It's all these impacts that I already went through, things you're familiar with, what are your thresholds for seawater intrusion and water quality, land subsidence, and on. And they included depletions of interconnected surface water. So, local authorities. These are the authorities that were offered to any entity that becomes a GSA. They're offered, they're not mandated. This is a key part of the legislation. It should be a local choice of how they manage their basin, and they might want to do it through fees, or they might want to do it through actually allocations and changes in groundwater extractions. But they're allowed to go in and monitor and measure for the first time in many of these areas where they didn't have that authority before. Governance, I'll go into a little more detail on the governance part of this. So who can be a GSA? A local public agency can be a GSA if it is a water management, managing water or land use. So there's a lot of discussion in the Act on who could be a GSA, and it's basically, we didn't pick favorites. The authors did not pick favorites. Counties wanted to be first come, first served, and the water agencies wanted to be first come, first served. And we said, this is something that is so different in each of these basins in terms of who the local leaders are now and who should move forward and who should work together on a GSA. So it's left up to the locals to decide, causing obviously tension out in the area. You can have one or more GSAs, but you have to cover the basin. There's no what we often called white areas, no spaces left unmanaged. They didn't want to, so there was a phrase, do no harm, and acknowledge the good work that's been done already. So areas that were already a special act district for groundwater management were given the first right of refusal to be the GSA, and that would apply to this region. So there's, I think, 13 to 15 special act districts specifically called out in the act that say you get to be the GSA unless you don't want to. And the other one is in terms of acknowledging good work. If you don't already have a special act district, but you've been really doing a good job of managing your area, then you can opt through an alternative process. So you can choose this alternative process, not write a plan, not form a GSA, but your plan, as of 2015, had to meet some standards. It had to meet, and I think Adam will go through that a little bit more. But that was another option given, so it wasn't assuming everybody had to go through this. And the last one was adjudicated basins, and I think maybe you saw quickly on the map that I showed, crosshatch areas were where the adjudicated basins, they're called out in the act, and it says if you're already adjudicated, you're already managed through the court, you don't need to go through this process, but you need to submit an annual report showing that you're still maintaining and meeting the conditions. State role. A lot of discussion on who should be involved, and a lot of fear of who should be involved. So DWR was given a lot of new responsibilities. It wanted DWR more in the driver's seat, and it made sense because it was a technical groundwater management is something they've been already doing. So they still continue with technical assistance. There's new financial assistance through Prop 1 that DWR will manage the $100 million that's in the Act for writing groundwater management plans, groundwater sustainability plans, and general implementation of the Act. And then the other one is the regulations will give to DWR, not the Water Board. And DWR's role then would be to review all the groundwater sustainability plans, determine whether they're meeting the requirements, and then monitor the ongoing implementation of, are they meeting the requirements in the plan. So the intervention only happens if the locals don't act or don't meet the requirements in their plan. So intervention, what does that mean? Who's doing it? The state board is the one that steps in, and there's sections in the Act that call out specifically what that means. If part of the basin is not meeting the requirements, that part of the basin goes on probation, and that's the term in the Act. So they determine probationary basins, and the first thing that happens if you don't submit your GSA, groundwater agency notification in time, then you have to start reporting groundwater extractions from every well in the area to the state board. So I think that's getting some attention. So after you've been labeled probation, put on probation, you have another 6 months to rectify anything during that time. And if after 6 months you don't rectify, you don't form a GSA, you don't get your plan in on time, then the state board will come in and write the plan for you. It's called an interim plan, and they can impose fees, they can impose actions to implement that plan. But at any point, if the local area steps up, meets the requirements, even after the 6-month period, it gets handed right back to the locals. So this process is, this is what's in the Act. All this has to be played out to see how it'll really work in reality. So I'm going to go through a little bit of GSA formation that's going to probably affect most of the rest of the state, but I was told folks are interested in what's going on up and down the state to implement this. It's complicated to put GSAs together in different regions, and they're looking at all different options, but we've kind of broken it down into these 6 steps. So in some areas, you need to identify whether you're a high, medium priority basin, or is some of your jurisdiction in a low or very low. So it's very basic. Figure out where you are in the map, and whether you have boundary issues, or you have multiple counties you have to work with. The state's put a really good website together, and they keep adding new information to it. So this website has the maps, has the who's submitted a notice on GSA. It's coming from Ventura initially, San Francisco PUC, and I think there's another area that's in Glenn County that's put in a notice already for GSA formation. And those are all posted on this website. So you know where you are in the map, you know where you are in terms of high and medium. You need to figure out who your neighbors are and who else is eligible to be a GSA. And the list can be long. It could be 3, it could be 40 agencies in a groundwater basin that are eligible that you need to work together with to say, who wants to step up? How do you want to work together? What are the overlapping jurisdictions? A key part of the act is it does say the county is on the hook if someone else doesn't step up. If it's a county-only area and no water district overlays the area, then the county's the agency of choice. If they don't step in, then the state board will be stepping in. Special Act districts, I've already gone through that, and the Bulletin 118 basin boundaries. So here's some examples of how this plays out in different areas. This is Butte County on the right, and some of the other counties around them. But just in terms of Butte County, they have 4 groundwater basins. They're sub-basins in that region. That if they stay with the existing sub-basin boundaries, they're working in putting 4 plans together at least, or participating in 4 processes. And in some of these, they have 2 other counties to work with in addition to the water agencies and cities. So this might be some of the examples of where people are saying, well, can we drop the line down to just kind of keep it all within 1 county or within 2 instead of 3 counties? It still has to make sense for the groundwater basin. So this is Kern. It's kind of amazing. They've actually were ahead of the game and put their joint powers agreement and authority together before the act was even passed to create a groundwater authority in the region. And they pulled 18 agencies together on a JPA to help manage this basin. And they're going to become one of the GSAs in the area, and they're going to share the responsibility between this kind of broader JPA that'll probably do a lot of the coordination and outreach, and then they're going to share it with the individual 18 agencies that'll actually be doing the implementation on the ground. So there's ways to put this together, but Kern's put it together through 1 JPA. So after you kind of understand your basin boundaries and who your players are, it's pulling in these areas that have not done a lot for groundwater management, find out what has already been done, find out who the leaders are, where the data is, and a lot of that's going on. And the state is in very different starting point. Different basins know a lot less about their basin, and some know a lot, as you know. So what is it we need to know, and how does that affect management of the basin? It's at this stage, I think, you look at whether you say, is our plan and is our data good enough to go the alternative route? So here's a picture of where the groundwater management plans were written before the act. So this is a good place to go. If you're in a county and you don't even know if there's a plan in your area, it's online at DWR that says what the plans are and where they already are. And that was SB 1938. And AB 3030 were terms and acts that put authority for groundwater management planning in place 20 years ago. And these plans still exist and are a good starting point. Stakeholder engagement, this was a part of the legislation that was negotiated. They're certainly encouraged through the act to do stakeholder engagement in all of this with not just local agencies, but those affected in the region. And it actually says, identify your interested parties, do active involvement, and maintain a list of those interested parties. In many areas, we're saying a good place to start is with your water advisory committee. And use that before you have a GSA, turn to your water advisory committee to be the kind of part of the discussion on this GSA formation. So before a region is going to raise their hand and say, I want to be a GSA, we're saying, find out what you're raising your hand to do. What part of this list do you want to be involved in? Do you really want to be the GSA for enforcement, or you just want to be the GSA for coordination? And you can pick and choose. You can do a mix and match approach. But people are rushing to, I think, put a notice in, and they're not quite sure what that means. So we put together, this is a very broad schematic of how some different people are thinking about putting a GSA in their area from the Central Valley and probably on the coast. These 3 different ways, and I'll go into them. If you're a single GSA, you're probably going to be a special act district that already exists, that covers most or all of the basin. And this is a single GSA that would do everything, not all the implementation enforcement. And I think what's happening in most of the state, that doesn't exist. There's no trust in that existing agency. You're probably not going to pick your county to lead this very complicated issue. So people and districts and agencies want to keep as much involvement as possible, so there's less movement to this unless there's already a special act district in place. This other one was envisioned through drafting of the act, is that every agency be a JPA part of it, but you put yourself together through a coordination agreement. And examples of that is, I think this might be what Butte County is going to do in each of their basins. They're not going to have one agency. They're all going to have a responsibility, and through their coordination and MOU, they're going to write the plan together. But everybody's kind of comfortable first with their own starting point, their own agency. Then the last one is more like what Kern, I think, is headed in. Nothing's been decided, but they've already created their centralized GSA that'll do coordination, and I think over time, with the trust of that new JPA, they'll give it more authority, maybe for planning or monitoring, but every entity in the area wants to have a role in implementation as well, so it'll be a kind of an umbrella organization as well as individual. I was asked to go, I just got one more slide, this is the last one. I was asked to go into a little bit of what we're doing at the Water Foundation after the Act was passed. And so we were certainly very active in some of the research and problem statement that helped lead to the passage of the Act, and working with all the stakeholders to pass it. So we have a high interest in its success. And we want that success, this is a big challenge at the local level, to move in these new government agencies and this new data. So we're doing how-to information, documents to put out there through different organizations, trying to share information in terms of case studies of how one area is doing, an early adopter to share with someone else so they can learn from others. And we're actually funding one facilitation process in Glenn and Colusa County to start their process about how they reach out and think through this process. We're doing as much as we can to kind of watch and monitor what's going on at the state in terms of the regulations to ensure it's meeting the expectations and intent of the Act. And agriculture, we're trying to build new coalitions and new relationships with ag. Ag is not happy. They were the main opposition to the Act. But they've really stepped forward, and I say ag as if they're one voice, but working with the Farm Bureau and some of the organizations, we're pleasantly surprised that while they were not happy with the timing of when this Act was passed and didn't feel like it was ready or had enough time, airtime, they're implementing it. They are working to educate their farmers and their members. And the last there are 14 to 16 bills in the legislature right now on groundwater, and probably half of them are modifying the Act or trying to change it. So we're definitely watching that. There's a sense in our organization, and I think others, is give it time. This is not time to fix it. Don't give it more time to implement. Don't give it less time, the locals less time. Give it give the Act time to settle in before you make changes. And that's it. Questions? This is my contact information.
One of the things I was surprised at is you did not mention the groundwater replenishment system, which is a very key component to that groundwater management in this Orange County. And it's also surprising that I have not seen in the governor's edict, or whatever you want to call it this week, any credit given to those municipalities that use GWR to help provide water. I mean, you would think they'd give some credit to maybe send other agencies to go out and invent and do GWR in their areas, because right now that's the thing that's saving us, and it's also saving our groundwater area.
Yeah. So the act does not pick the water management strategies that a local area should implement, right? It's up to them to make those decisions. So I think it's neutral on it. There was conversations in the act about, are there barriers to groundwater recharge and replenishment that need to be addressed in the act? And we couldn't get there in the negotiations. And a lot of it is viewed as maybe more of a regulatory permit process than and that might be not solved through the legislation. Anyway, we couldn't get the water agencies to agree to that issue of is groundwater a beneficial use, groundwater recharge a beneficial use. That was the big kind of theme. And so we're still, it's an important priority for us. There is money in Prop 1 for implementation, and I think it's on our radar, and I think it's on others to make sure that it is encouraged and promoted as one of the key tools for solving this problem. So I don't know what else to say.
Well, what about the governor? Why can't they give some credit to this? In other words, we get fined a certain amount of money if our water use goes over a certain area, it doesn't decline by 20% in our city, so we get fined. But I mean, if we're doing stuff, we're providing more water, you should get some credit for it.
Yeah, well, I haven't been involved in the new percent per capita reductions. This was a big issue even in the 2009 legislation as well. It's like, what's fair? How do you give credit? So I hear you, recycled water is a big part of it. I'm not probably qualified to answer your question about certainly what the governor's doing or what the thinking was behind it to get credit for recycled water.
The current groundwater agency, was that formed through the county or the current water agency?
It was actually formed on their own.
Well, somebody has to leave.
Yeah, so actually it was Rio Bravo, what's the long name of one of the groundwater recharge agencies there. The general manager there was pulled in, probably by a couple other water agencies that trusted him, Eric Aberrett, to be kind of the staffer to help. He was doing two jobs, kind of holding meetings with 18 agencies to say, what do you guys want to do? How do you want to work this? He'd bring the options forward, and he's actually got the hat as the general manager of this new groundwater authority, and he's still general manager of another one, so I asked him what his plans are.
Somewhere it describes you had a website, and you went quickly through it, and I missed it, and I wondered, is there a...
Yes, I can get to it.
About 6 slides back.
Oh, did you get it? There it is. Yes.
Yeah, of the 1,900 pending legislation this year regarding this, what, if any, have a good chance of passing, and what kind of changes are they looking at?
Well, one bill by Senator Pavley, and I didn't actually say this, but I think Adam will, but anyway, Senator Pavley was one of the authors, is just technical cleanup. And they're staying very clear, this is not changing any substantive part of the law, so I think that will. I think a bill on expedited adjudications or streamlined adjudications has a good chance of passing. It's got a lot of support from agriculture as well as water agencies are looking at it, but there's concerns from the administration on how adjudications in the future are coordinated or mesh with this new act. And so that's one of the issues in the bill. Once you become an adjudicated basin in the future, are you opting out of the SGMA as they do now? And that's the point of contention. I can't think of any others. There's at least 3 on beneficial groundwater recharge is a beneficial use, and saying that saltwater barrier is one of the beneficial uses and should be allowed. And then there are some that change the date of deadlines, and I don't think those will have as good of a chance. And I'm trying to think of some of the other categories, but that's...
Boundary adjustments.
Boundary adjustments? Okay. Thank you.
If you have any other questions, she'll be around after the meeting. Today we're going to have our own groundwater expert at the Orange County Basin, Hutchinson, is the recharge planning manager for the Orange County Water District. He's responsible for testing and evaluating new methods to increase the capacity of the system recharge system. This is a good follow-up to the question. He has over 20 years of experience and 15 of those years working with the Orange County Water District. He's the Director of Recharge Operations for the Orange County Water District. Please help me welcome Adam Hutchinson.
I hate introductions like that, I look like embarrassing. Great.
Live up to it.
Well, it's great to be here with you this morning. It's great to have Kate here. You know, Kate and I had a lot of opportunities to collaborate last year on the SIGMA as it was being drafted and developed, and she was one of the key players behind the drafting of the legislation. And it was great to have her as an ally in terms of understanding where the legislation was going and what ideas were being thrown around. And we were actually able to have OCWD mentioned along with the 14 other special act districts called out in the legislation, and that was partly due to her support and working with her. So really thankful for the California Water Foundation and all the good work that they're doing. It's great to have you here. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Orange County and how SIGMA will affect us in particular, kind of drilling down into the local picture here. So anyway, I love this picture here. This is our first board of directors in 1933 here in Orange County. As you can see, there are a bunch of farmers, right? This is an agricultural area. And a lot of the issues that we were dealing with at the time are why SIGMA was passed. You know, we're dealing with overdraft and seawater intrusion. And we've been dealing with this for 100 years. So fortunately, we've kind of gotten through it. And we've been actively reaching out through Kate and others to try and share the OCWD experience so that people can learn from our success and failures and how we've gotten to where we are today. And so I think that's an important point to make, that we've kind of already been there, done that, and hopefully others can get to where we are today. So as we mentioned, this is the 3 bills that were passed and signed by the governor forming SIGMA back in September of last year. So let's see, let me read this here. So special act districts were listed that we can continue managing sustainably. Kate mentioned we didn't want to do any harm. If you're already doing a good job, keep on doing what you're doing. And OCWD was one of the 15 special act districts listed in the act specifically. And basically just gave us the authority to continue managing within our statutory boundaries as we always have. We have to show DWR, here's our plan, here's how we're doing to make sure that we're still doing sustainable groundwater management. So the onus is still on us to prove that we're doing a good job, as well as the other 14 special act districts that are listed. So some of the key deadlines, as Kate mentioned, we've got basin boundary regulations that are going to be adopted in January. Actually yesterday, DWR had a public listening session at the San Bernardino Library that I attended, and what they're doing is they're trying to collect information, understand the boundary issues before they proceed with drafting regulations later this year. And also, June of 2016, they have to adopt regulation for the groundwater sustainability plan, what needs to be in those plans. And then by June 30th of 2017, you can submit the alternative to the plan, and I'll mention that in a little bit. And OCWD will probably go that route. Rather than submit a formal sustainability plan, we'll just submit our groundwater management plan and have DWR look at that as a functional equivalent. Stamp it, okay, good, it passes muster, you can keep going and doing what you're doing. So this is the what's called the coastal plain of Orange County. That's the technical name that DWR uses for our area, and as you can see, it's outlined in yellow. We are a medium priority basin. And that's basically because of the heavy reliance on groundwater that we have. It's not a reflection of the fact that we're not managing our basin properly. It's just a reflection of the criteria that DWR used to rank the basin. And so we just happen to fall in the medium priority category. And what's interesting is the central basin right to the north of us, they're a higher priority basin even though they're adjudicated. It's just a function of the ranking system and how it came out. I want to also talk quickly about the San Juan Valley and San Mateo basins here. The San Juan Valley is a low priority basin right there, and the San Mateo is a very low priority basin. Now, just because you're low priority or very low priority doesn't mean that you can't submit to become a GSA or manage a basin per the Act. In fact, Kate mentions San Francisco Public Utility Commission actually submitted to become a GSA for 7 basins that are all very low priority basins. So they're not required to, but they want to because they know they're going to do a lot more active groundwater management in the area. So they want to be on the books of having a plan, having an agency to oversee that management. So these basins can apply to become GSAs or managed if they want to, but they're not required to. So this is our Bulletin 118 boundary in red here, and it required that all this area be managed in some fashion. So now if you overlay our district boundary on top of it, you can see that there's some outlying areas that are not included in our jurisdictional boundary. And we're going to be working collaboratively with the organizations that have purview over these areas. For example, La Habra, in the very northern part of our groundwater basin, they are actively pursuing putting together a groundwater sustainability plan. They want to go ahead and apply to become a GSA for their area. And that's fine. If they do that, there'll have to be a coordination agreement required between us and them. It's called an inter-basin coordination agreement. So that'll have to be established. We have a small area in the canyon over there, in the Santa Ana Canyon. There's really not much going on out there other than the Green River Golf Course. There's some groundwater pumping there to support the golf course, but most of it is open space. And then we also have the margins of the mountains here and the Irvine sub-basin area. And so we'll have to work on how those areas are managed collaboratively with the agencies overlying those areas. So that's basically what we're going to be doing, working with other agencies to see how we can comply with the Act. There's also the option to maybe passively manage these areas. Yesterday, in talking to DWR and State Board staff, we were kind of talking about when do you have to do active management. There might be certain areas where there's really no groundwater pumping, the resources are very limited. Does it rise to the level where we have to actually establish an entire new organization and agency to manage those areas when there's really nothing to manage? And so there's a lot of debate and discussion going on as to whether that would be allowed, what form that would take. But the bottom line is every area has to be accounted for and has to be managed if necessary in the future. There can't be orphan areas that are just discarded and allowed to just lie there unaccounted for and not being watched. So what is the sustainability plan? Basically, it's just a set of measures, a set of actions that you're going to take to prevent all those undesirable results that Kate mentioned here. So we've done all this through our plans, so we don't have to worry about that. But that's kind of what the metric is for all these other agencies that have to set up plans. Now, OCWD, we've been managing sustainably for well over 50 years in our basin. Our groundwater management plan was first published in 1989. Before it was even required, we went ahead and put one together and put one out. The 5th update is now after public review. On our website, commented due on May 22nd. I put a notice of public hearing on the table in the back. We're having a public hearing to review this document on May 20th. So you're free to review the document, make comments on it. We have revamped this document significantly to mirror what we think DWR is going to require of groundwater sustainability plan. We didn't have to, but we just thought, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go above and beyond. And also maybe other agencies around the state can look at our plan and see that, hey, this is a good model, this is a good approach to go after in terms of how we establish our groundwater management plan. Now, when the regulations come out for the alternative plans, we'll maybe have to tweak our plan to fit whatever regulations DWR comes out with, but we expect those to be minor. Make some quick little changes, submit that to DWR, the alternative plan, and then we would then formally be given status as the exclusive groundwater manager in our area at that point in time. So that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at right here. So we're going to continue managing as we always have. We have different options. We can elect to take on the additional powers of the GSA if we want to. That's really up to the board to decide. We're going to present options to the board in the future as to what the range of options are in terms of how do we want to proceed with compliance with SGMA. There's a whole list of things we can do. And the final approach will obviously be presented to the board, and they'll make a decision at some point in the future here. So that's something we're actively working on right now. But I think the bottom line is we want to continue managing our area in a sustainable fashion. So our next steps, staff is reviewing DWR's strategic plan. It's out for public review. If you guys want to look at it and comment on it, you can. This is the website where it's on there. The same website that Kate mentioned earlier. Comment that due by June 1st. Also, DWR is looking at the basin boundary regulation. They're under the gun to get these done by January of next year. So they had a public listening session yesterday, and the staff has been involved, and we're coordinating with DWR in terms of the regulation, providing input. This is the timeline for the boundary regulation here. We're right there at the arrow in May. So basically, they're going to go off and draft the regulation and come back in the summertime with those draft regulations and put them out for public review. And then they'll adopt those regulations in January. So next steps, basically, also continue participating in ACWA. ACWA has a very large implementation group that they put together, and I've been going up to Sacramento every 6 weeks to participate in that group. Statewide agencies that are interested in implementation of the act, providing DWR feedback. DWR has been very proactive in reaching out to ACWA and other agencies to get feedback and input on how they move forward. It's a very collaborative approach, and ACWA is one of the key agencies involved in this. So CWD is actively involved in that as well, making sure that our voice is heard and providing our input. So I went through a lot of information right there, but that's it. Any questions from anybody? Yes.
Under the premise of hiring from the government, I'm here to help you. What do you see the potential pitfalls might be for, you use the euphemism, doing a good job? What that might mean going forward in the future?
Sure, I understand the question. What do you mean doing a good job?
Well, they're going to define what doing a good job means, right?
Right.
Do you have any fears about what that might morph into as we move forward?
Well, in the Act, it actually talks about if you can submit a plan that shows you've been sustainably managing your groundwater basin for 10 years, that is acceptable to DWR. And so our groundwater management plan is going to show we've been managing sustainably for well more than 10 years, 50 years. And so DWR is going to look at that and go, yeah, that's good. You've been managing sustainably. Keep on doing what you're doing. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Yeah.
Part of your plan is depending on water coming down the Santa Ana River. How does that guarantee that you're going to maintain some water supply coming down the Santa Ana River? How is that tied in and working with the county of San Bernardino and River Price?
Right, that's a great question. As we all know, that base flows have declined significantly over the past 10 years. Well, you know, the groundwater management plans are adaptive management plans. You have to change with the situation that you have. You know, our groundwater management approach over the years have changed in response to different opportunities. You know, back in the 60s, we were importing 1 million acre feet of imported water to respond to seawater intrusion. Now we have a seawater barrier. So our approach changes and evolves over time. So our approach is going to have to change given lower base flow, and one of those is GWRS. That has taken the place of base flow over the past several years, and we're going to continue working on increasing the amount of recycled water we generate. We're also going to increase the amount of stormwater capture that we get. We're working on that right now, purchasing more imported water. So we're going to continue. Our projections show that even with declining base flow, we can actually increase the amount of water we put into the basin through the combination of the other sources I just mentioned.
Okay, but is that written actually in the plan that you are getting the water from the other counties and coordinating this together?
Yeah, the plan definitely talks about what's your projections, how you're going to handle future sources of water, because we have those all in the plan. Yeah.
And the same question comes up with imported water. How much imported water do you include in your plan, and what's the sustainability of imported water for recharge?
That's a great question.
we have committed to, with MODOC, to buy 65,000 acre feet a year of water for the next 10 years. Now, whether that water is available or not, we don't know, but that's our plan. If you ask Metropolitan, they say it's going to be there, so I guess we just have to trust them. But that's all we can do. We can just make our best
But the price could
faith effort.
now, right?
What that?
The price varies significantly, right? The price of that water.
The price goes up, right? It doesn't go down. It never goes up. Like the price of gas, right? It always goes up. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much. Don't forget to pick up the security.
Well, during the Soundless Video Fair, we neglected to follow the agenda and we skipped one important report, the CSDA report. So I'm inviting Chris Palmer to please come and give us the report on the CSDA.
I'm a former staffer. I'm used to being bumped to the end, so no problem. Good morning. My name is Chris Palmer. I'm the new Public Affairs Field Coordinator for the California Special Districts Association. Today it's been actually 1 month since I've been there. I was formerly with Congressman John Campbell for 13 years. So this is a great challenge. I'm really looking forward to getting involved in this. I'll be responsible for all of Southern California. I also have a Northern California counterpart. And this is kind of a new CSDA grassroots program. Eventually, we're going to have 3 reps here in Southern California, 3 in Northern California, but that won't happen for another year or 2, so it's going to be all me for SoCal. And I'll be based here in Huntington Beach, so you guys will see a lot more of me here. Just want to give you a couple quick updates what CSDA is doing. One, the high-risk local agency audit program is expected to launch on July 1st. So this is out of the California State Auditor's Office. So they approved regulations for this high-risk audit program. This came out of the little incident in the city of Bell. And so CSDA formed a working group. We're working very closely with the State Auditor Board to make sure that special districts, there isn't a one-size-kind-of-fits-all regulations, and that the state auditor takes into account the size of your district and number of employees, et cetera, and that there are mechanisms so you kind of know what's coming up, so you have a chance to rectify before they actually start this high-risk audit. Second would be special districts need to take note of SB 239. Now, right now, this just deals with fire districts, but it sets bad precedent if this goes through. Threatens local control. It would require local fire agencies and fire districts to obtain the approval of their employee union and LAFCO prior to contracting with another local agency. So this could be really bad news locally for local control. So keep an eye out at SB 239. Again, it's only fire districts right now, but we fear this could expand to other special districts as well. Third would be there's new public works requirements. I'm sure most of you are probably aware. As part of the 2014-2015 budget, the state overhaul that's monitoring and enforcement of prevailing wage laws. So any type of public work project over $1,000 needs to, you have to notify the Department of Industrial Relations. And beginning this spring, you actually have to use, any contractors, subcontractors that you use have to be registered with the DIR. And these contractors and subcontractors have to pay $300 to be on this registered list. So I wanted to make you guys aware of that as well. And lastly, there's been a key change to Committee on Special Districts. Most of you here know John Warlock, our new state senator, and he has been appointed to serve on the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. So this committee is responsible for hearing legislation pertaining to state and local government revenue mechanisms, taxes, and land use and development. So we need to kind of get him on board with anything that we need. He's going to be a key figure on that committee, and he replaces State Senator Pat Bates. So that concludes my report. Thank you for your kind attention. I look forward to seeing everyone next month. Thank you.
Our chairman, please.
Good, thanks, Jose. Well, we're almost coming to an end. We're going to hear from Michelle, I'm certain, next month. And we'll get our volume controls taken care of. And Leah Hernandez from Senator the House office has joined us on the road, so welcome to Waco. We look forward to seeing you down Waco. Is there anything else to come before we adjourn? Meeting adjourned.